Welcome back to Demand Gen Chat. I'm your host, Tara Robertson. Really excited to have everyone listening today and very excited to introduce our special guest for today. So I'm joined today by Sydney Waterfall. Sydney is the VP of Demand Generation at Refine Labs, a demand accelerator for B2B SaaS companies. Sydney, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here. Big fan of the podcast. Listen to it. So I'm happy to be on it now.
Great. And we're huge fans of everything content-wise that Refine Labs puts out. So really excited to have you. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your role at Refine Labs and what customers come to you for help with?
Yeah. So Refine Labs, we help customers kind of get off the MQL hamster wheel and really deploy a demand gen strategy across their entire go-to-market engine. So we work primarily with B2B SaaS customers, anywhere from, Series B on up, and really help them transform going from MQLs to qualified pipeline, which we call hero pipeline, as their main KPI, and ultimately driving quarter over quarter increase in hero pipeline and ultimately revenue. And so we do that by following a lot of the tactics that you see Refine Labs doing, but also deploying paid media and consulting on a wide variety of high intent topics for our clients. So that's a little bit about Refine Labs and me specifically. As a VP here, I manage some of our account teams. So that would be our directors and performance marketers that manage clients. I help them with strategy, and I'm really focused on client strategy and making sure we're customizing our Refine Labs playbooks to the customer's business and looking at how we can drive long-term growth for our clients.
Great. And I'm really interested in the pipeline piece specifically because we are huge believers in the not tracking vanity metrics, not focusing on MQLs. Kind of that whole story. We're bought in on that at Chili Piper. But I'm curious if there's any other top of funnel metrics that you do recommend that customers look at.
Yeah, I definitely look at MQLs. We define an MQL as a high intent conversion. So that's going to be, a demo request or your main conversion point. Someone coming to your website and asking to talk to someone from the company about your product. So normally it's a demo, it could be a pricing, contact us, whatever you label it. That's the metric that we look at, is how many of those are we getting per month by all channels. And then how are those converting throughout the pipeline? So how many meetings are being booked? And then from that, how many what we call a hero opportunity, which is a high intent revenue opportunity. Really what that means, as you know, every company defines an opportunity and when they create an opportunity and stages differently. So we like to kind of streamline that as an opportunity that converts to revenue at 25% or greater win rate. So 1 in 4 of those deals are going to close. So we have confidence in those closing. So that's what we call as a hero. A lot of people call SQO, have a bunch of different names for it. But we like to standardize that. And then, a lot of the other metrics that we're looking at, are going to be, I would say, key indicators or things we monitor, but they're not main KPIs for our clients. And for that, we measure ourselves internally on success of how are we doing with this client. So, we look at obviously our demo conversion rates. We're just monitoring and understanding site traffic. We don't really look at clicks from paid media. We have a very different viewpoint on how to deploy paid media. We're going for consumption and engagement in the feed, which usually leads to less clicks directly off the platform, but more engagement education. So, and then obviously in other more captured demand channels, which would be, your review sites or your paid search, we're monitoring conversions in there because we're only optimizing and monitoring high intent conversions.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And do you help your customers figure out what that hero opportunity looks like for them? Because the 1 in 4 close rate sounds great to me, but I'm sure it's a little tough to get there.
Yeah, it's different for every client. It's actually part of the work that we've been doing the last couple of months with our clients is
Mhm.
For one client, opportunity create is meeting booked. For another client, opportunity create is like after the second demo and they've got pricing out, So those two
Wow.
things are going
Yeah.
to convert and have very different, everybody has their own sales cycle and, um, you know, partnership with sales of like when do AEs create opportunities and all that. So we actually look at all their opportunity data. We look at the stage history. We're looking at what stage for them does it hit that threshold? And then we say, boom, okay, for you. So like Chili Piper, your stage X is going to be, maybe it's your stage 3 or your stage 2. I would say assuming a six stages in your opportunity stage model. If you assume 6 or 5 to 6, it's normally stage 3 that we find that
Mm.
converts consistently to 25% to revenue. And that's specifically like demo requests as well. Like we're looking at that high intent pipeline, not necessarily like trade show leads or something like that. We're looking at a very
Mhm.
specific section of that.
Yeah, just the hand raisers,
Yeah, just
basically,
the
is
hand
what,
raisers.
yeah.
Yeah. And like, what are those conversion rates?
Great. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So, kind of the opposite spectrum of hand raisers is just along the topic of dark social or dark funnel. People are
Hmm.
calling it kind of both these days, but I'm really curious what, from your perspective, how you tie kind of that data driven approach of knowing 1 in 4 of these types of ops can close to working with customers and getting them to do more on the dark social side of things, because those are obviously very different approaches, but you kind of need both to win in marketing today. So just curious how you approach that with a new customer.
Yeah, I think the concept of dark social is it's how buyers consume information on the internet, and it cannot be tracked by. As you know, you guys do a lot of great dark social. This podcast, right? And I've seen your videos clipped, and I've even seen them in ads. I've seen them just on
Mhm.
organic. I know that you guys are also very involved in communities, different Slack communities, things like that. All of that's dark social, sharing information peer to peer that cannot be tracked. So a lot of the channels I just mentioned, but even word of mouth, um, even ad hoc meetups. Like a lot of people just like go meet up. That's going to be
Mhm.
a kind of a word of mouth channel. So now, what really drives the high intent hand raisers, like learning about you, understanding your product, and coming back to your website and knowing your brand, knowing the brand to even come to first is going to be how do you educate people in those channels that they're in? And a lot of people don't because they can't track it. They're like, well, we want the click, or we need to be on this channel and do this
Yeah.
activity because I need to show success. So if you move your metrics of success and you're only looking at pipeline, you're allowed, you're not handcuffed. You're allowed to, because you're not handcuffed to how many clicks you're driving to the website or how many form fills you're getting from that campaign. You're then free to actually market and push out content where people are consuming it and then where it's shareable. Like think about Slack. Like how many times have I like sent, hey, this ad's really cool, or this product's awesome, or um, that's just how people share these days. So when we move the metric for success and we kind of reframe the funnel for people, especially our clients, they're more engaged to run programs like that. And so we help consult on like, hey, you should be doing this and let's stand some of this up. And even though we're not actually executing on like their organic strategy or their, event strategy or something, there's a lot of content we can
Mhm.
do that drives that.
It's funny that you brought up word of mouth, because I've brought dark social up to a few marketer friends just kind of locally, just here and there. And a couple of them have said, well, isn't that just word of mouth? Like, what's the big deal about dark social? And like from my perspective, at least, I think the difference is in B2B marketing, we pretended that we could track everything, or we tried to track everything. And dark social is kind of us saying, you know what, we actually can't do that. So here's what we're going to call it and label it something new. But I'm curious if you ever run into that feedback from people that, hey, this isn't really anything new. It's just word of mouth.
No, and I think that the difference is uh, the distribution. And like,
Mhm.
for example, I think dark social uh, fuels word of mouth. Like there's other things that are word of mouth. Like I listed, for example, like meeting up with a coworker or a peer and
Mhm.
talking about a solution. That's like pure word of mouth. That's not necessarily dark social. Dark social is having LinkedIn DM conversations. Like, how did I get on this podcast? Like, right? Like, hey, do you want to come on this podcast? I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, sure. Um, that's a dark social. What's happening in social.
Mhm.
So I would say, you know, even, personal posts that I post on social that people just view, but they don't like or engage with, but they're consuming that information. That's dark social. I'm
Mhm.
educating somebody about something. Who knows what I'm talking about? Depends on the day.
Right.
Probably, obviously, something related to marketing most times. But
Mhm.
so I would say that's the difference between dark social and just word of mouth. Word of mouth, there's other channels as
Mhm.
well and other avenues. Text message could be word of text, maybe. Word of mouth.
Oh, yeah. I hope I
But
don't start getting cold texts, but
yeah, so I think
Mhm.
and if you're distributing video content, people are reading or listening to it, they're not clicking on it, they're just scrolling. That's
Mhm.
dark social. You can't measure that. You can't measure if that person came back to your website and converted.
Right. Yeah, we've tried to track some of this on Slack. Like we'll just share screenshots, but the most probably marketing to marketers example I could think of is we have a great marketing channel on Slack. And pretty much every marketing team I've been on has had that where we just kind of have a place to dump like, oh, I saw this great ad, I saw
Yep.
this great interaction online, just so the other channels are a little bit less crazy. But I got a screenshot from a friend of his great marketing channel and one of our blog posts was in it.
Yeah.
So I shared that on our great marketing channel. And it's just like, there's no way we could possibly track that if that opportunity ever closed. But
Yeah.
you're right. It's not word of mouth. It's something slightly different. And I think it's really cool that people are kind of putting a name on it and figuring out what we can do to drive even more of that.
Yeah. And I think, if you think about the funnel, right? We obviously at Refined Labs, we talk about creating demand, capturing demand, and like dark funnels, even above create demand. It's like, how do you create
Mhm.
demand? You need to be in dark social to get people into there, then to drive them into intent and drive them into more capture channels. So that's kind of how I personally look at it. But yeah, we have a Ad Labs channel where we share
Mhm.
really cool
Fun.
creative, cool ads, cool different things. Our whole creative team shares like all the creative we produce for our clients, just so everybody can see the great work that they do. So yeah, that's one of my favorite channels.
That's fun. Yeah, I love to poke around on those channels. Sometimes I have to mute them so I can go check in later, but it's great to stay up to date. Since you mentioned creative, I'm curious because we've been undergoing a bunch of CRO work on our website, and I'm curious if you've ever seen any customers or if you've done any work on kind of integrating any kind of dark social campaigns that you're running or just something specific that you're trying on offline channels, if there is any way to optimize that for conversion, or if it's just something that you have to say, you know what, this is just a totally different goal and we're not going to try to optimize that for conversion.
Yeah, as your point about dark social, you can't optimize for conversion because you're in the wrong intent mode. You're then
Mhm.
just doing it to get something out of it and to make dark social and even just like content um, and pushing your brand out there of creating demand. You have to come at it from an angle where you're not expecting a direct conversion or you're not even expecting something immediate. Like you just want people to consume it and possibly get like some qualitative feedback on it. Um,
Mhm.
but when it comes to like website specific, like
Yeah.
um, we have implemented a lot across a lot of our customers the how did you hear about us form field, and that has really been able for us to understand like the impact of the channels that they're on that are
Mhm.
dark um, and if those channels are resonating with people.
Right. And you guys call that self reported attribution. But I'm curious because
Mhm.
we've started experimenting with that a little bit on our thank you pages. So I was personally very worried about our form conversion. So I didn't want to put it on our demo form. So we have it after the fact if someone successfully gets through the flow. but we're getting very minimal details from people. So I wonder if it is because they've already gone through this whole flow that they're kind of sick of giving us their information. But I'm curious, what type of information do you get on a form like that, or that your customers get?
So I'm not surprised that you're getting minimal information on the thank you page. We've had probably 4 to 5 customers implement that the same way against our recommendation, which is fine, you know. And then they later switch and just put it on the form. So what we recommend is, if you can, just replace a field on your form. So we typically, we don't tell our clients to go out there and just, start changing your main conversion point and seeing what's happening, right? It's bad advice.
Right.
We definitely we're like, okay, let's roll this out in A/B tests for like 2 or 3 weeks, just to ensure we're not, something is, tanking the conversion rate. All of my clients that have rolled it out, we roll it in a 2 to 3 week A/B test. You're not going to get stat sig, but you're not really looking for statistical significance. You're looking to make sure it doesn't really drop the conversion rate a noticeable amount that you might be uncomfortable with. So phase 1 is always make it required, free text. And if you can replace, like, job title, like, do you really need that right up front? You can probably get that, enrich that, use a, data enrichment tool like Cognism or something to enrich that. Or you can get that information, when you get the meeting booked, hopefully with Chili Pepper.
Hopefully.
But yeah, so we've tested that out, and we don't see any difference in conversion rates across a couple of different clients. We're actually hoping to publish some of that data soon, because it's the number one objection we get.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that, because I'm personally getting pushback on that we have an open field for it. But for me, it's kind of, if we give people a drop down, they'll pick either the first option or just whatever comes to mind first. So yeah, I really pushed back and said we need it to be open, but I'd love to see some of that data. I'm sure people listening would love to see that too.
Yeah. So one of the first clients that ever implemented this, it was a pick list. And, we mapped that all the way to the opportunity and close one. And, at least they were doing it. It's better than nothing. We could definitely see some really cool trends. They had a podcast, right? They had all these things that they were doing. And, over like 28% of their closed won, and over 35% of their qualified opportunities said other. And it's like,
super helpful.
Still not helpful, right?
Right.
And so they actually tested it, like, okay, well, what if we, they're both required fields, one free text versus one pick list, didn't see a difference in the conversion rate. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you exactly what their conversion rates were, but it was their data, but didn't see a noticeable difference in their conversion rates over the time we A/B tested it. And now they're getting much more enriched, insightful. And these are not marketers. Like these, I feel like marketers might be a little bit more, give you more information because they're marketers too. But these are,
we get both ends of the spectrum. We get people that put one word and then like an essay from someone else.
They're like, let me tell you my multi-touch 17-step journey in this field right here.
Great. How do we get everyone to do that, please?
Yeah, you're like, how do I do this? So, I mean, for one of our clients, we launched a new channel, and they told us exactly where on that channel they saw the ad. It was wild. I was like, how do you even remember that? Some things where we get in and stuff that's not even related to even some of the work that we do with the client, but it's so helpful. So, hey, I heard it from this webinar. It wasn't even a sponsored webinar or anything. It was just something that their brand happened to get mentioned on. And now it's like, hey, let's go maybe explore like some partnerships with that brand, because if your audience is already there, like that's a win. Podcasts come through, referrals, like, hey, I heard you from this customer, or I heard you from this community. You get like a lot more specific data rather than social media. You're still going to get someone that says social media or web search, right? And so typically we roll that out. We gather data for about a month, and then we do a month, like an analysis for our customers. We take all that data, free text form, and we kind of look at it, and we start creating buckets for them based on what they are getting in their business, not necessarily like the exact buckets we recommend based on our business. So like if they don't have a podcast, they're probably not getting podcast submissions. They don't need a bucket for that, right? It's an example.
Hmm.
And then we say, okay, here's the larger 7 buckets we're going to classify all these responses into. And then we create a field, any marketing automation system can do it. We've helped customers with it. You create kind of like a category field or a bucketed field. And now every time that's automated and it gets into a bucketed field. So now you can put that into your CRM. You have reports, right? That's a little bit more manageable to read, like social media, events, community, whatever. But you still have that core qualitative data that's the most insightful, that can lead to a lot more better business decisions. And I mean, I was talking to a CMO yesterday and they said, I know that I can't show direct attribution to that, but I'm okay with that because when I go to my CEO and my C-suite, like I'm telling him I'm hearing this from customers and I'm telling them I know this is working because I'm hearing it directly from them. And it just is like a little touch point in the whole journey. But if, that's all you really need to justify that this is working. And they have an attribution software that costs, I don't even know how long, that we still look at, but she knows, take it with a grain of
Doesn't
salt.
always match up. Yeah, that was actually a good segue into my next topic, but I think that's a really great approach to getting buy-in on dark social, because that's one thing I've heard from a lot of people is I'm on board, manager level, everyone gets it. But once we go up to our VP or our CMO, it's just a hard sell because they've really bought into our fancy automation tool, or they really want us to buy a fancy automation tool. So bringing this self-reported data in there and showing them like, hey, there's some gaps here and maybe we can try to marry those. But I'm curious from your perspective, I know you had a similar post on LinkedIn about not overcomplicating attribution. So with this in mind of trying to layer on the self-reported plus the attribution you already have, how would you approach that, knowing that there might be some hesitancy on the dark social side and we're trying to make a case for that?
Yeah, everyone's going to have attribution software or solution. All the automation systems that you have already have one. And then you might even have another one to layer on top of it. That's totally fine. I think, just have to understand that there's stuff that you cannot track that no technology can track. There's no product going to solve for it. And so you're like, okay, if you think about this logically, how do I understand what I can't track? How do I understand what's going on? Well, you could do that with the self-report attribution field. You could ask your customers on gong calls. You can ask them after they've been customers. Like you can literally just ask. So that's a touch point. Then you can understand, okay, of all the other things that I could track, how does that fit in? And so that's kind of how I look at it. But when I simplify it, I mean, there's so many different attribution models that anyone can tweak any data to like make their department or their campaign like look good. It's actually pretty easy to do, honestly. If you know,
Yeah,
if you
if
know
you
how
want
to
to play with
manipulate the
first
reports.
touch, or yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could be in here making a visible touch point report, and it could be any touch point ever in the entire life cycle contained content. Oh my God, our content is like, blowing it off the charts for the revenue, right? Just an example. But when I say basic, it's the main touch point I think people need to be focused on is the conversion source. And when I say conversion source, I don't care what touch it is. I don't care if it's the first touch or the 17th touch. All I care about is it's the hand raised touch. It's the point where they raise their hand, and I want to know what happened there. Where did that come from? And then I want to be able to track that, map that to the opportunity and down. That's the main thing I'm looking at when we look at with our clients. And of course, we're still looking at, okay, what's driving net new acquisition of first touch? Like, how does their first touch compare? Do we see any trends, first touch for like all of these in this bucket? Do we see any other, things that we could pull out of the data that could be useful. But I've seen so many wild attribution models, and I am asking basic questions. I think in that post there's like 3 basic questions where I was like, if you can't answer these like very quickly, like you're overcomplicating it.
Right. And one of
Um,
those questions was like, where are your demo requests coming from, for
yeah,
example, which hopefully you have a report that shows you that isn't too complicated. But if you don't, I think that's a great place to start, to your point.
and then most people or most companies can say, oh, how many contacts did we get, or leads, contacts, whatever you work out of. Um,
Mhm.
we got this many demo requests. That's their first touch. I'm like, yeah, but how many form fills? How many total people filled out this form? And they're like, oh, well, they're a known contact, so that would be like last campaign, but that field like updates and like isn't locked. So I'm like, okay, just let me get into the automation system. I'm gonna see like how many people filled out this form this month.
Yeah.
Like,
Just
I'm
go
like,
into
the fact
HubSpot
that
or whatever and pull
yeah,
the
and just,
list.
I don't,
Right.
again, we don't care what touch it is. We want to
Mhm.
understand like how many people asked to talk to our sales team this month. You can't answer
Mhm.
that. And then you can answer how many of those went to meetings, how many of those went to qualified opportunities. That's a problem. And I think it's just because like, and I'm guilty of it too. Like, I mean, I am a Marketo visible girl back from like 10 years ago, like I
Mhm.
loved it. Even when Visible was just starting, I was one of a company that was one of their first customers. And I was like, I love this. This is amazing. But I just think over time, it's changed. So,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think in the meantime, since they came out, communities have just blown up. I mean, not that they didn't exist before, but to your point around Slack, I can't even tell you how many Slack communities I'm in. And half of the posts are saying, what's a great attribution tool? What's a good tool for this? And that just didn't exist 5, 10 years
yeah.
ago. People were following a little bit of a more linear buying journey versus just doing a lot of their own research.
I think everything a lot of things on the internet were on your own domain, right? They were on your own website, your own domains that
Mhm.
you owned. So you could get that data. Well, now, how many applications do you have on your iPhone, right? Like, um, that
I
don't
couldn't tell
serve ads.
you.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
some of the
Mhm.
applications obviously do serve ads, but how do you get information? You don't go to the company's website anymore. I'm just going to ask community, or if I have a question about chili pepper, I'm going to be like, Tara, LinkedIn or email, like, hey, here's my question. Can you answer it? Or someone I know that uses the product, right?
Mhm.
Um, you're not going to go to the website. I mean, you might go eventually to the website when you're ready to convert, or look at pricing or something, but more not in the discoverability phase anymore. I would say more when you're ready to actually like research your buying decision. Um, Almost like buyer enablement.
Yeah, I think the difference now too is you know that when you do put up your hand and say, "Hey, I'm ready," you're not going to get a break. You're going to be hounded by someone who's trying to show you the tool. So you're going to do as much research as you can outside of their domain, because when you're ready and you raise your hand, like,
A
okay, this is
thousand,
it. My schedule is going to be busy with demos now. So,
1,000%. And like, it's kind of also on B2B created that environment. Like, how many ebooks have you followed up? And then you got the email, you got the phone calls. Like, everybody does not want that because they are not ready for that. So,
mhm.
hence why, you know, I believe you shouldn't be getting your content anymore. But that's a whole
Yeah,
nother
that's
episode.
another episode. Yeah, that's another fun topic, but whole other episode. Um, One thing just really quickly is on the topic of just that touch before the demo request, we're actually shifting our model into what we're calling booking context. So instead of what caused them to fill out any form on our website, which is a little bit of what we're doing now, which isn't perfect and doesn't give us great insights, we're really looking at what happened right before they booked that call,
Yeah.
whether it was like the channel, the campaign source, just figuring out how granular we can get. And I think we'll hopefully have a lot of insights to share once we do roll that out. But I think that's a new approach that we've heard a couple other people thinking about too, where to your point, nobody needs to track 20, 25 different touch points, but we need to know what caused them to raise their hand and what was that final thing that really moved the needle. So curious to see how that
Yeah.
self-reported data will line up with what we're finding internally.
I mean, between that and your self-report attribution field, you guys are going to be killing it. But yeah,
I
that's
hope
like
so.
what we
Yeah, that's the
recommend.
goal,
So
is to figure
yeah,
out what we can learn from and teach people. So great.
yeah.
Glad to hear we have your stamp of approval on that. That's important to me.
Not that you need it, but sure.
Yeah, no, it's great. Anything else on just the topic of multi-touch attribution? I feel like we covered it pretty
Yeah, I
thoroughly.
mean, you know, e- people think that like, I don't know, everybody at Refine Labs is like so against attribution. It's like we're not. We just like need to have another way to capture dark social attribution.
Mhm.
Um, and I think like many things, marketers, myself included, are like not even attribution, could be like campaign setup in your ad platforms. Like we love to just overcomplicate things. I think that's like been bred into us. So
Yeah.
just simplify when you can. Simplify, 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 I would say.
I think that's great advice. And if you're simplifying and also asking people what pushed them to book a demo and trying to do that again and again, I think, yeah, you'll be set up for success. So that's great
Yeah.
advice.
Mhm.
Cool. Well, before I let you go, I do have a couple quick fire questions for you, if you don't mind. So, first one, is there another marketer you follow that our listeners should go follow and take advice from?
I mean, I think Nick Bennett is doing a great job talking about community and personal brand. He's got a community that's really cool. Um, I mean, honestly, if you want to like know anything about TikTok, it's like a shameless plug for Todd. He works at Refined Labs, but the guy's like so talented at TikTok and like his strategy around it. It's wild. I I've already talked to him about trying to do TikTok, and it's on my list, but I have not made it a priority yet. Um,
Mhm.
those are the first two that come to mind, but oh my
Yeah.
gosh, there's so many. I feel like I could give you like an Excel sheet.
No, those are fun ones. That's good. It's good to have something fun to follow up with. And what's an under the radar, either channel or tactic that your team is really loving or seeing lots of success with right now?
I don't know if it's like super under the radar, but video content specifically like podcast clips. We've
Mhm.
been putting like paid spend behind that and like getting those like guaranteed views. And that's been working really well. They're some of our highest um, engagement, from view rate and video engagement rate with some of our clients. So it's really kind of helping to drive their podcast acquisition strategy. Um,
Mhm.
linking straight to the podcast that you could listen to it. That one's a good one. And then literally like today, we just rolled out LinkedIn. You can now do story sizes on images on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
So take up more of the feed. And it's designed for like a mobile placement. But we've been taking some of our Facebook story creative for some of our clients and just rotating that into LinkedIn to see if we can get more engagement off that placement, because the Instagram story placement gets by far probably the highest engagement off of that placement of Facebook or Instagram, not including video, but like a more static placement.
Mhm.
So we're
Hmm.
transferring that over to LinkedIn just to see how it goes, see if we can get more of that feed taken up,
Yeah, that's a fun experiment. I haven't touched LinkedIn stories yet on paid, so I'll have to check that out. That's a
Yeah, it's
fun one.
not on the LinkedIn stories, not like the sponsored ones, but you can
Mhm.
take, of course, I'm forgetting the actual image size, but it's the same size as you
But
would
it's the
make it.
bigger
It's the bigger,
size.
but it's
Right.
the mobile version. And
Mhm.
you put that in, and it'll get served on mobile for LinkedIn. So it literally takes up
Mhm.
the entire phone when you're scrolling. So we're just
Wow.
testing that against the vertical like square size, the 1080 by 1080 size.
Great. That's a good tip. And lastly, where can our audience go to find out more about you or follow your content? What channel are you most active on?
I mean, no surprise here, LinkedIn. Yeah,
It's the
Sydney
number one
Waterfall.
answer so far.
Yeah, Sydney Waterfall on LinkedIn. You can find me there, and maybe one day I'll be on TikTok. That's a goal
We'll
for
be
myself.
waiting.
So I'm saying it on this podcast, so I will actually have to do it because people will call me out now.
Great. We'll keep an eye out for that. Thank you so much,
Awesome.
Sydney. Thanks a lot for your time. And thanks everybody for listening today. Hope you can join us on the next episode of Demand Gen Chat.